You may rest assured, he would say to her, that my promise shall be kept. I've already forced Russia to disgorge her portion. The rest must be the work of time. We must be patient. The supreme moment is not yet. Policy is a cord that snaps if strained too tightly. Meanwhile, you will be forming your politicians. How many can you count at the present moment? You are rich and patriots. I allow. Every arm is ready to strike a blow for the cause. Courage and honor are the very breath of your heroes. But this is not enough. You lack unity and purpose. No man had ever shown himself more hostile to feminine influence in politics. Yet, strange to say, he returned to these subjects incessantly and almost involuntarily in his evening interviews with Madame Valeska, discussing schemes for the amelioration of social conditions, the revival of animist movement among the people. Such a movement he deemed indispensable to the future of the nation, even should it prove inimical to the dominant aristocracy. You know, he said, that I love your nation, that my inclinations and political convictions alike point to its reintegration. I am willing to second its efforts and maintain its rights. All I can do for it without prejudice to my own duties and the interests of France, I am ready to undertake. But you must remember the great distance that divides us. What I build up today may be destroyed tomorrow. My first duty is to France. I cannot shed French blood in a foreign cause, nor send an army to your aid every time you are threatened. Often, to the amazement of his companion, he would pass from some weighty speech of this sort to the discussion of society gossip, scandalous anecdotes, family secrets. He liked to tell him the private history of everyone he met. His curiosity was insatiable, insisted on the utmost minuteness of detail. It was his method here as elsewhere when great interests were at stake of forming an opinion upon the governing class from all these trivialities, none of which ever escaped his memory, and in which he showed an interest that astonished his informant. He drew his own conclusions, and she found that she had provided him with a weapon it amused him to use against herself. She protested, indignant at the inferences he drew from her facts, and the quarrel ended in his tapping her on the cheek and exclaiming, "My dear Marie, you should have been a Spartan woman. You deserve a country of your own." Loving her as he did, he wasn't actually much interested in her dress. It was a subject in which he considered himself in authority. "You know I am a connoisseur of costume," he wrote to Savary, even under the consulate. It was he who always chose the presents sent to sovereigns such as the queens of Spain or Prussia. No badly dressed woman ever escaped his criticisms in his own court. Even Josephine, who had accustomed him to the greatest luxury, the most perfect elegance, the utmost refinement of taste, was not always accepted. He had a special dislike to dark dresses, and Madame Valeska observed the utmost simplicity in her attire, always wearing either white, black, or gray, a fancy which caused him much annoyance. "A Polish woman," she said in answer to his remonstrances, "must wear mourning for her country. When that is restored to life by you, I will wear nothing but rose color." Every discussion seemed to lead him back to the one topic, but it neither angered him nor wore out his passion. In a letter of this day to his brother Joseph, he writes, "My health has never been so good, nor my material enjoyment so complete." Such confidences are the more significant that they were unusual with him. Not content with seeing his mistress every evening in private, he insisted on her appearance at every dinner and every fete he himself attended during his sojourn at Warsaw before the campaign of Eylau. During their presence at such festivities, he conversed with her incessantly through the medium of that secret and silent language he had taught her, in the use of which she had become more expert than Duroc himself. She was able to follow and interpret signs addressed to her alone, and to divine a love message from the gesture accompanying some animated remark or grave discussion, some precise enunciation of fact, or solemn pronouncement. "This surprises you," he said, "but I must fill the great position that has been assigned me worthily. It is my high privilege to lead nations. I was an acorn, but I have become an oak. I stand on an eminence, and far and near I am noted and observed. This position obliges me to play a part not always natural to me, but which I must needs sustain, if I would satisfy myself, to say nothing of others. Yet even when I am the oak for all around me, I love to become the acorn for you, and when we are surrounded by a watchful crowd, how can I say, Marie, I love you? Whenever I look at you, I long to say it, but I could not whisper it in your ear without a loss of dignity. When he made Finkenstein his headquarters, he insisted on her accompanying him. Her life there was a melancholy one, very much on the lines of that she had let at Valavici with her old husband. Her solitude was only broken by tete-a-tete meals at the Emperor, served by a single footman. The slow hours were spent in reading and needlework, her only other distraction being to watch the parade from behind the window blinds. It was the life of a recluse, subject only to the commands and discretion of a master, without society, pleasure, or vanities. But it was more congenial to her than the brilliant, feverish gaiety of her life at Warsaw. In her, Napoleon realized the dream of a woman as he had hoped to find her in Josephine, a woman soft, tender, and submissive, without ambition, apparently without will, a creature all his own, who lived but for him, and who, if she indeed looked for some return from him, desired in a form so vast and impersonal that none but the loftiest mind could have conceived it, while her very confidence in his power to grant the boon raised him to the level of the gods. Such thoughts as these stirred the inmost fibers of his being, and made him in his turn the humblest of suppliants. When he was about to withdraw from Poland without having realized the dream for which this woman had bartered herself, when she, desperate and disillusioned after a final appeal to him to restore her country, refused to follow him to Paris and declared her intention of retiring into some solitude, there to await in prayer, in tears, the fulfillment of his broken vows, he answered her in these words: I know that you can live without me. I know that you have never given me your heart, but you are gentle and compassionate. Your heart is so pure and so noble. Can you indeed deprive me of a few minutes of happiness each day by your side? You alone can give me such moments, and yet men call me the most favored of human beings. He smiled so sadly and bitterly that her heart swelled with a strange pity for this master of the world, and she promised to come to Paris. She arrived at the beginning of 1808. Henceforward, this mysterious liaison, interrupted no doubt by occasional infidelities on Napoleon's part, that left his genuine passion unshaken, was established on so strange a footing that were not the proofs we hold irrefutable, and the chain of evidence forged by the collation of dates and details unconsciously furnished by a variety of witnesses complete, we should not dare to vouch for a series of facts apparently unknown to the highest contemporary authorities. From these authorities we learn, however, that Madame Walewska went to Vienna during the campaign of 1809, that a luxurious house was prepared for her close to the palace of Schönbrunn, where she became pregnant, and that after the peace of Vienna she returned to Valavici and was there duly delivered of a son, Alexander Florian Joseph Colonna Walewska, on May 4th, 1810. In the light of more recent knowledge, it is not unreasonable to suppose that Napoleon's vacillation on some points in his negotiations with Austria and his irresolution touching the fate of Poland may have been due to the presence of her, to whom he had promised the restoration of her country. In no contemporary record do we find any mention of Madame Walewska's return to Paris in 1810 with her sister-in-law, the Princess Jablonovska, and her infant son. She lived in a pretty house in the Chaussée d'Antin, first at number 2 Rue de Houssaye, then at 48 Rue de la Victoire. Every morning a messenger from the Emperor attended to receive her orders for the day. Boxes at all the theaters were placed at her disposal, and all the museums were open to her. Corvisart looked after her health, and Duroc was specially charged to gratify all her wishes and make her outward life as varied and agreeable as possible. We may give one slight but significant instance of her power at Spa. A young Englishman, Mr. S., had made some joke of very questionable taste at the expense of Princess Jablonovska. On their return, the princess invited him to accompany Madame Walewska and herself to the Artillery Museum. The party paused in the hall devoted to ancient armor before Joan of Arc's suit of mail, and Mr. S. was gazing at it. The heroine suddenly extended her arms, seized the young Englishman, and pressed him to her breast. Half suffocated, he struggled, gasped, and begged for mercy, but Joan declined to release him until Madame Walewska gave the order. Bearing in mind Napoleon's extreme jealousy of any interference with his museums, the incident is a conclusive proof of exceptional privileges. Whenever he could escape, the emperor came to snatch a few minutes of her society or sent for her and her son, on whom he conferred the title of Count of the Empire immediately after their arrival in Paris. None but a few Poles among the society of the day seemed to have had the slightest suspicion as to their relations. Madame Valeska, indeed, lived in the utmost retirement, receiving only her compatriots. Her manners were perfect, her mode of life modest and unpretentious, her conduct very reserved. When she went to take the waters at Spa, she was accompanied by her sisters-in-law. She spent the summer in the Chateau de Brigny, a house rented by her sister-in-law at Mont-sur-Orge, the property of the Duchess de Richelieu. Nor could she ever be induced to leave it. It was her constant endeavor to hide what others were proud to proclaim. The modest country house was her world, and she rarely quitted it. Repeated invitations from Josephine obliged her occasionally to appear at Malmaison with her son, whom the empress loaded with toys and trinkets. But she seems to have held aloof from habitual intercourse at the imperial court until 1813. 2 full-dress toilettes figure in her account for the first time that year. One black velvet gown with cherusque of tulle embroidered in gold, the other a costume of white tulle in cherusque and a feathered turban. Hitherto, though her dress bills show her to have been fairly lavish in her expenditure, her evening dresses from Leroy alone amounting to some 3,000 francs a quarter, she had had no court dress. She had retained her preference for white and for pale tints, somewhat suggestive of mourning. Thus she ordered dresses of lilac silk, of white tulle, with 3 rows of acacia, of which tulle patterned with rose petals, her gowns of blue and white, her national colors, a dress of shot taffetas in blue and white, a dress of blue tulle trimmed with white heather and daisies. Napoleon did not require her presence at court to keep her in his mind. We need but quote a letter written at Nogent on February 8, 1814, in all the throes of the French campaign on the morrow of Brienne, on the eve of Chambopere. He had desired his treasurer, Monsieur de Bouillerie, to arrange for a reversion of the property settled on young Valeski to his mother in the event of the young count's death. Agitated by the thought that the formalities had not yet been concluded, he wrote the following note to La Bouillerie with his own hand. I have received your letter relative to young Valeski. I give you a free hand in the matter. Do what is best, but do it at once. I am deeply interested in the boy and after him and his mother. And Nogent, February 8th. Of all this she knew nothing, for no one was ever more purely disinterested than she in those last days at Fontainebleau. When abandoned by all, the emperor attempted to find in death the refuge fate denied to him. She waited all night in an anteroom, expecting to be summoned, absorbed in bitter thoughts and exhausted by the physical crisis through which he had just passed. The emperor never thought of asking for her till an hour after she had left. Poor woman, he exclaimed. She will think herself forgotten. He misjudged her. A few months later, towards the end of August 1814, accompanied by her son, her sister, and her elder brother, Count Leszczynski, she landed at Elba and spent a day with the emperor in the Hermitage of La Marchiana. In 1815, when she heard of Napoleon's return to Paris, she hastened to welcome him, and we find her conspicuous among those women whose devotion survived his happier fortunes and who gathered round him at the Élysée and at Malmaison. After the banishment to St. Helena, however, she considered herself free. Madame Valeska had died in 1814. I said that wrong. Monsieur Valeski had died in 1814, and in 1816 she married General Count d'Ornano at Liège, where he had sought an asylum. After the second restoration of the Bourbons, d'Ornano was a cousin of the emperor's. Formerly a colonel in the dragoons of the guard and one of the most distinguished officers of the Grand Army, this marriage moved the captive of St. Helena deeply. The emperor, said one of his companions, was greatly attached to Madame Valeska, and it was not in his nature to suffer anyone he loved to love any but himself. The poor woman's happiness was very brief. She was confined at Liège on June 9th, 1817. Permission to come back to Paris having been obtained for her husband, she returned thither and died in her house in the Rue de la Victoire, December 15th, 1817. The brilliant career of his son, of whom Napoleon wrote his will, I wish Alexander Valeski to devote himself to the service of France in the army, is a matter of history. His course as soldier, writer, diplomatist, and statesman is too intimately connected with contemporary history to call for comment and too recent to be made the subject of judicial appreciation.